Hey TikTok. I'm going to read a short story. I might look a little ragged. I only got a few hours of sleep last night because of what happened in the United States today. But I'm going to try and push through this. On Saturday, November 9th, I will be at the Washoe County Authors Fest. We'll be there selling my books. It's at the downtown Washoe County Library in Reno, Nevada. And I will be doing a reading from my new short story collection, Short Songs. And so I gotta practice. And I'm going to read one of my short stories as soon as I can find it. These short stories are basically, in my Skywrite series, I have a lot of supporting characters. And they've been around for 5 books so far. And some of them appeared beforehand in other works. And they were starting to really come forward and gel as characters. And it got to the point where I realized I needed to give them their own stories. But this one story is the singer Gail Burp, who appeared, well, technically she appeared in my book Stella Mars when Sky went to see one of her shows. She just went to see her show, but she wasn't a character in the book. Sky ended up getting into a fight at her show and breaking someone's nose, which Sky gets in a lot of things like that. But anyways, I'm going to read from my short story collection, Short Songs, and this section is called The Closet. Gail did not think that her 2-story Victorian house in North Berkeley was all that big or elegant. But most of her friends had other opinions. Perhaps it was the walk-in closet. She went past her brand new and brand newish formal wear to look through her band shirts. She wanted to do right by her old friend Scritch. She only found out about her crazy stage diving disaster area of a friend's passing recently, when one of her bandmates happened to mention it. Scritch died, said her guitarist far out. Really? Far out giving Gail a look. Are you really surprised? I guess not. Scritch had been a scene regular ever since Gail was a teenage runaway, going to the Gilman Club every weekend. He had never been part of her main crew, but she had seen him often enough during her early Gilman days to consider him a club friend. That is, up until the fag bashing incident. A gang of baldies had confronted Gail and her dyke gang outside of Gilman, talking all kinds of trash and moving around them as if they were getting ready to attack. Gail and her friends stood their ground, talking back and daring them to try something in an attempt to get them to back down. Gail remembered how her and her friends were not going to back down, even though they were outnumbered, even though they knew there was a good chance they were going to get seriously hurt. The showdown didn't last long when Scritch and a group of his friends walked up, pushing the baldies out of the way to join Gail and her gang, letting them know they were going to have more than enough people to fight if they wanted to start trouble. It was enough for them to back down, even though they made threats about coming back around with reinforcements. Scritch told Gail that when he saw they were getting harassed, he gathered up a group of punks to help them out. That's when Gail and Scritch became really good friends. He had crossed that line from being a familiar club scenester to being a true comrade, and they grew ever closer after that night. She felt her face getting warm, thinking about him, now that he was gone. The bedroom door creaked open. You gonna go visit your friend? Gail turned around. Molly had just gotten out of the shower, and her short black hair was sticking straight up from her fresh coat of hair gel. Yeah, just trying to decide what to wear, said Gail as she turned back to her wardrobe. You always do that, agonizing over which band shirt to wear when we go to a show. Gail held up her old Germs t-shirt. You knew Scritch? Molly shrugged. I remember shows and parties. He ran around with a pretty rowdy crowd that I wasn't down with. I knew Sky and Miranda knew him pretty well. Yeah, that gang liked to hang with rough trade. Molly leaned against the doorframe. How did he die? Gail mimicked injecting herself in the arm. Molly stood straight. Jesus, not another one. Right? It's a fucking epidemic. Gail took off her shirt and put on her germs t-shirt. I gotta visit this place at least once. It won't sit right with me until I do. You want me to go along? Ain't you got a recording at the studio? Molly waved a hand. It's all good. I can bail for something really important. Gail crossed her arms as she thought about it. Nah, don't ditch. You gotta see that through. Besides, I think it's something I gotta do on my own. You sure? Gail nodded as she turned to Molly. I hope you understand. I do. Gail walked up to Molly, giving her a long kiss, and then wrapped her arms around her. Did they have a memorial for him? Asked Molly as Gail let her go. No, he died 3 weeks ago. I only found about him a few days ago. No one told you? No one knew. He was staying with his girlfriend Crease when he overdosed. That crazy bitch didn't tell anyone. She even had him buried and didn't tell no one. No shit. I think Sky and Miranda want to kick her ass now. They gonna beat her up? Nah, they just wanna. But I don't think they'll go that far. Molly chatted with Gail for a few more minutes before she grabbed her own clothes and took off for her recording session. Looking around her wardrobe, Gail remembered feeling somewhat embarrassed when she had to make room in her voluminous closet for her new wife, Molly. She had to put some of her own clothes and accessories in storage in order to make space for Molly's modest wardrobe. She wondered how it all reflected on her as her solo career kept climbing and she was raking in more and more money. She was getting hustled much more often by music industry people trying to get her to mainstream her act as her numbers kept climbing. She looked at herself in the full-length closet mirror, double-checking her carefully spiked bleached white hair. She took a good look at her face and wondered if she looked too gaunt. Gaining at least a little more weight was one of her goals, but she was still struggling to pack on a few more pounds, even with the extra food she had been adding to her diet. It was odd for her how she was considered rock and roll eye candy, to the extent that her managers convinced her to hide her relationship with Molly, the idea being that revealing she was no longer single would hurt her career since it was, apparently, common knowledge that most of her fans had a raging crush on her. Looking at herself in the mirror again, she facetiously thought that her fans were taking too many drugs. She wondered how so many people could possibly lust after someone who was so thin. Looking away from the mirror, she tried to push the lingering shame of having hidden their relationship out of the way. It did not matter to her how many times Molly told her it was no big deal. She could not summon any other regret from her wild punk past that surpassed the shame of having hid her coupling with Molly for the sake of her career. She wondered if she would ever be able to live it down. Turning back to her wardrobe, her closet was crowded, not so much because of her new gear, but because of her older garments and accessories. She simply could not bear to part with many of her old band shirts, such as her nearly gray Operation Ivy shirt that was so faded and worn that any other person would have tossed it out or have turned it into a back patch. Then there was her old pair of black jeans, which had faded to an indistinct gray color. It still had its forest of safety pins, desperately holding the old, faded, and frayed pants together as best they could. Then there were the large arrays of shoes and boots. Her new Doc Martens, her old Doc Martens, her Doc Marten soles, her Chucks, her Creepers, her old army boots, and her Red Wing shoes. The Red Wing shoes that she had bought when she was in her old street gang, the Lower Haight Danger Dykes, also known as the Double D's. As she picked up her Red Wings, her thoughts drifted back to those Lower Haight days when she was a rowdy teenager. Her and her friends often make their way to the much more colorful and busy Upper Haight to mess with tourists and make fun of the gutter punks who would spare change along that popular stretch of Haight Street. She remembered how rude and obnoxious herself and her gang had been wearing army jackets and flannel shirts to make themselves look more intimidating while yelling, swearing, and acting out in overt attempts to push people's buttons. Gail could only cringe at some of the memories, how they had acted out, oftentimes to people who did not deserve it. Occasionally they would mess with gutter punks who were harassing and hustling people, and once in a blue moon they would face down overly aggressive panhandlers, especially if they were harassing women. But usually they were just out for kicks, swearing loudly and acting crazy to intimidate and shock civilians and tourists. She thought about old gang members like Freakums, with her chubby cheeks that belied her rough punk exterior, her ever-limp mohawk hanging down one side of her face or the other, since she rarely had the time or money to spike her mohawk straight up for maximum punk effect. And then there was Skilly, the tall and gaunt woman who always used too much black eyeshadow, which made her look quite deranged with her short, always spiked bright red hair. She always wore skimpy clothes that showed off her sinewy body. And despite being the most diminutive member of their gang, she always managed to be the most threatening looking, the one that really scared people. Then there was Teddy, the stocky and wide one with the bulldog face who always stood behind them, the large and burly presence who never took off her faded olive green army jacket, grimacing behind the rest of the gang as a bulldozer backup, a presence to give others second thoughts about trying to throw down. She wondered where they all were, where they had gone and what had happened to them. The only one she was still in contact with was Freakums, who had gone back to using her name Julie. She had cleaned up her act and was nesting with her partner in a roomy apartment in the Castro. Of everyone who had been in her gang, she always thought Freakums would be the last one to sell out. Her Red Wings were cracked and worn with age and overuse. They were the only shoes she had back in her Haight Street days. She had not even bothered to replace the frayed shoelaces. She decided she was going to wear them to the cemetery. Putting them aside, she recalled how the Double Ds got a humbling dose of reality when they ran into Sky's mob, the Crusties. The first time she met Sky at a raucous punk club, she saw her break a rowdy boy's nose, cracking him with one lightning-fast punch that made a sickening noise and sent the spiked-haired, tough guy reeling back to retreat with the rest of his frightened gang. That's when Gail realized that her and her friends were not the kind of mob that could stand up to such a group of punks. That Sky and her friends Casey, Lori, and the rest of the gang members were the kind of rock and rollers who got into real fights. The kind where there was a chance someone could end up in an ambulance. Gail never told Sky that story, how it brought her and her friends down to earth, forcing them to rethink what they were doing. She glanced at her formal wear, through that collection of clothes that was not what most people would consider to be especially formal. She only saw it as fancy clothes because they were so far away from the frayed jeans and band shirts she was perpetually wearing. She had her old pantsuit, the one she reluctantly bought when she was looking for real work, something that paid better than the starvation wages of retail and restaurant jobs. She had bought it years ago with the help of her straight-laced cousin Jessica, back when Hop Skippy was still a club band. It was the first band she had ever played in that had musicians that were just responsible enough to keep the act going. She remembered Zahn insisting that they practice, even when there were band members who hadn't shown up, just to get in as much practice time as possible to keep them sharp and polished. She remembered Vixie running around town, hitting up every venue for shows, trying to keep the band active. She especially remembered how caught up she got with Zahn, when he insisted they play balls and ovaries through the wall, as he put it, even if the club they were playing in that night was only half full, even if the crowd was only made up of their friends and musicians from other bands. Zan had convinced her to have faith that word of mouth, even from small club crowds, could help spur the band on. When their crowds started getting big and they were making actual money from their first album, Gail sought better paying work. She remembered the excitement and chills she got from believing in the band, going out of her way to try and make herself look as civilian as possible for job interviews at offices and high-rise company lobbies in order to make more money to support the band. Gail never got that chance to get such a job. She had only worn her first piece of serious corporate wear to a few awkward interviews before the band started making enough money from record sales to keep them going without any added extra income. She looked over her other sets of normal clothes, or normie clothes as she called them, the ones she wore to polite family gatherings, which were very far and few between. She remembered how Tondasil had prodded her to keep some plain clothes around for such things as court appearances or overtly uptight corporate events. Sage music advice she had gotten from the tall and slim band manager, even though she was not her band manager. She wondered if she would wear something normal or formal when she went to visit her friend who met the same fate as too many of her fellow rock and rollers, that she should respect the solemnity and gravity of the moment with proper clothes. Gail winced as a wave of self-disgust washed over her. Scritch would not want to see her wearing anything formal or plain. He would want to see her, to see the real Gail, the one who was rough around the edges as they came. He would want to see her looking like she was about to go to a crazy punk show. She took off her germ shirt and dragged out her Faya shirt and her ripped-up pair of black jeans, along with the Red Wings that she wore when she commanded the Double Ds. Dressing up would just be disrespectful. So yeah, that's the short story. One of many. She refers to a lot of characters. Let's see, like she refers to Tondasil, she refers to Molly. That gang she talks about, Freakums and Teddy and Skilly, are all characters I made up for the story. In a punk and goth and just general rock and roll culture, fashion is a big deal. It's a really big deal. And the whole point was like, when she goes through all of her clothes, she thinks about what's going on. Malcolm McLaren once said that fashion took over without anyone really noticing. Well, we noticed. I mean, she goes through her clothes, she goes through her old clothes and her new clothes, and it just brings back so many memories. The cracked shoes, thinking about flight jackets and flannel shirts. It was really the Red Wing shoes that just tipped off her memory. And thinking about how she was supposed to dress to visit her friend's grave. And unfortunately, I've had to visit a few too many final resting places. I was part of that whole culture, the crazy club rock and roll culture. And yeah, a lot of people I knew went far too early, far too young. Mostly because they led those rock and roll lives, and they were kind of asking for it. And that's the book, Short Songs. That's a rather solemn story. Not all of them are like that. Most of them is about people reflecting on things. There's another short story in here where my character Tondasil, who is Sky's band manager of her band, the Dynamite Chicks, it's when she's in Portland and she is looking through books in Powell's Books, one of my favorite bookstores. The Powell's Book on Hawthorne Street. No, not Hawthorne Street. Burnside, I'm sorry. Hawthorne is the hipster street with the smaller version of Powell's. Powell's has a bookstore there, but it's big for a bookstore, but it's not the big store. The big store is on Burnside. It's huge. It takes up a whole city block. I could spend all day in there. I really could. If you've never been to Powell's in Portland and you're in or near Portland, you have to go visit Powell's. If you have any interest in books at all, I hope my books are all over the place in there. Anyway, Short Songs, it's available. That's my Arthur's copy. You can see it's got that not for resale band on it. I do have some Arthur copies with me for sale. Like I said, I'll be reading at the main Washoe County Library in downtown Reno on Sutter Street on November 9th, 12:40 Pacific time. Maybe I will get someone to do a TikTok live of me doing it. Anyways, I'm going to practice reading this a couple more times. I do have to read this story in 15 minutes. I'm not sure if that was 15 minutes. Maybe it's close to being as long as 15 minutes. There's another story in here where my character Roach, who's Sky's drummer, the Dynamite Chicks are doing really well. They're threatening to break into mainstream success. And so Roach does the only thing she can do. She buys a new drum set, a huge drum set. This is based on a true story. A friend of mine who ran into a whole bunch of money, and he had this little drum kit, and he bought this thing, double basses, all kinds of toms, like a forest of cymbals. And he played in a couple bands, and he insisted on bringing the whole damn thing with him every time. And his bandmates called it the Monster. And yeah, I remember him dragging that thing around. I mean, I think it was brilliant. I mean, it was brand new. All the pieces were black, black toms, black snare, black double basses. And basically, Roach buys something like that. It's about her looking over her drum set, and she's also reflecting about her life when she's looking over the drums. Because buying a brand new drum set when she's in a band that's so successful is a big turning point in her life, and it makes her reflect. And yeah, I write about musicians. Most of my friends are musicians. Sometimes I wonder why I never became a musician myself. I was in a couple of bands, but they never got anywhere. And when I say they didn't get anywhere, I mean we literally never got to the point of actually playing a show. We never got past practice. Most of my friends were drunks, drug addicts, and just utter flakes. And the reason I probably never got in a band was because I could never find enough people who could actually get their act together enough to actually play in a band. That might be it. I might have been able to be a musician, but tried harder. And sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I had done that. Because music is such a huge part of my life. It really is. And like I said, everybody in this book, I think just about everybody in this book is a musician. Is there anybody in here who's not a musician? Well, Tonda Sill is not a professional musician, as she is a band manager. She is a pretty good musician, and something she doesn't want people to know, because she works with musicians, and she doesn't want people hustling her to be in their bands, something like that. Anyways, short songs by me, Jeffrey Vernon Maddox. Whoops, that's not where my name is. God, I don't even know where my own book is. That's my name up there. Jeffrey Vernon Matica. Am I going... Is there any way I can flip this around? Meh. I don't know. Anywho's. Jeffrey Vernon Matica. Matucha. That's my last name. It's really weird. It's easy to find me because it's such a unique name. But yeah, that's it.